Yeah, so as Brandon said, I'm excited to be here with everyone and hear about the hard work that our fellows have been doing over these past couple of months. It was about 2 months ago that we all got together for the kickoff of our workshops, and we talked about some of the dangers facing American democracy. And I was just blown away by the questions that you all had and how engaged you were around this topic and how that has manifested into the podcast that you've produced. I think this is among some of the best episodes that we've gotten in the several years that we've been doing this fellowship program. So, congratulations for getting this far. As I'm sure you've learned, making a podcast is easier said than done, but you've all done fantastic work this semester, and we're thrilled to do what we can as the Democracy Group and the McCourtney Institute for Democracy to share the episodes that you've produced. And we certainly hope that you'll keep working on your podcasts after the fellowship ends. And if you do, please keep in touch with us about that so we can continue to promote and share the good work that you're doing.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenna. Annalise and Joseph, what will happen today is you guys will be given an opportunity to give a little short pitch about your podcast, telling us, about your topic, your audience, and the episodes that you created and what you might be creating in the future. Um, we're going to have a little bit more time for you, so about 5 or 6 minutes you can share, and then Chris and David, Jesse, Jenna, myself may ask a few questions following up and finding out more about what you've created. So, Annalise, I'm going to go ahead and start with you, and then we'll follow up with Joseph afterwards.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Annalise. I'm a high school student from the Bay Area, California, and I'm really excited to introduce you guys to my podcast, which I call Civically Thinking. So I was really inspired to create this podcast kind of after observing how civically disengaged like a lot of young people my age are. The one statistic that really like jumped out at me and kind of sparked my idea was that in 2024, 1 in 3 young adults reported having no intention of ever voting, and over half were dissatisfied with democracy overall. And so I thought that was just a really big problem that I really wanted to hone in on. I think that like the root of this issue is so multifaceted and so interesting. I think a lot of it is from extreme polarization and the effects of social media. And I think there's so many different ways that we can talk about this problem. But even more so, I really wanted to approach the problem from a very like solutions-based and forward-focused perspective because at the same time, there are so many like amazing youth-led efforts that are combating this sort of disengagement. So in the first episode of my podcast, through like the practice interviews we had, I had a really good conversation with Kayla Pilgrim, who she's the 19-year-old founder and president of the Civic Success Project. And that conversation was just so interesting to me that I really wanted it to be in the first episode of my podcast.
Hmm.
So yeah, Civic Success, what Kayla made, it's this really amazing youth forum that basically offers like resources and pathways and just like general outreach to young members of democracy. So, in the future on my podcast, I would love to interview more youth leaders like Kayla who are kind of fighting civic disengagement and like working really hard to involve young people in civics, which I truly believe is like where we belong. And beyond just like things like the right to vote, I hope like it can also hopefully inspire young people to embrace all the other civic rights they have. So like the right to protest and to reach out to policymakers and have their voices be heard on this like national, state, and local level as well. So really exploring the problem of disengagement from a solutions-based point of view and like a place of hope for the future and how people are solving it. So whether you're like a high schooler, a teenager like myself who can't vote, or like even a college or post-college age, like young adult who maybe is eligible to vote but doesn't really feel supported or like empowered to do so, I would really want to help encourage people to utilize their civic rights by sharing the success stories of other young people who are doing so. And it's not just like big national organizations like Civic Success, which I think is really important, and I'm really excited to see where that goes. But I would also want to share like smaller, impactful stories, like the leader of a new youth town council or like a really devoted college student who is organizing protests on their campus. So the really big question behind my content is like, how do we get young people more involved in civics? And then what does that involvement actually look like? And so I hope that through civically thinking, I can help like give listeners direction in answering that, and really build some kind of platform that inspires young people to just be more involved in democracy overall.
Well, thank you, Annalise.
Yeah,
Question.
wow. You are really impressive.
Thank you.
I have a question, and my question is actually the last question you had. Is this the format? Can I ask this question or?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Um, uh, how do you get kids your age to listen? You know, how do you get them to tune into this? It's a chronic problem, like in all media, right? Like not just for podcasting, but you know, from an election, from parties, you know, on through. How do we get this group engaged? And I have to say, the presentation, the data that you had put, is just really, it's compelling. And so then the question is, how do you hook? You know, what's the hook for this that you know that you're thinking? And by the way, I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer for my own podcast. So, you know, I'm asking selfishly as well as, you know, hopefully in a way to help.
hmm Yeah, so I think examining like my age group, I think the biggest thing that I need to do is make really actionable steps. Because I think a big reason why people don't feel engaged is because everything in like the world of civics just seems so like detached because it's like all very like polarizing or like all these big issues. And I think a lot of young people, they just don't really know where to start when it comes to getting involved in these things. So I think the way that I would want people to tune in is by making it a very easy, like kind of like mobile. You can kind of just tune into a podcast anywhere. You can be on your way to school and just tune into this podcast that's really going to teach you about this subject. I think like when you just try to encourage people to be more involved in civics, a lot of people just don't know what that entails or like what the steps are to go about that. So I think kind of the intrigue of having something that is so easily accessible. Like everybody nowadays has like a Spotify or some sort of streaming platform. I would really want to rely on that and make it clear to people that this is an actionable way they can be more knowledgeable and be more involved, but it's also something that's very accessible to people my age.
Mm, thank you.
Yeah, and following up on that, Annalise, I'm wondering if you've had a chance to play your episode or parts of it for any of your friends, and if so, what they think.
Yeah, so I actually, during the editing process, I was able to show it to some of my friends, and we all kind of just sat down. Like, we were actually driving somewhere, so we were just in the car, and I put on the podcast for them. It was about like half an hour long, I want to say, and we listened to it all the way through. And I think my friends are interesting because the people that were there with me like varied a lot in the range of like, hey, this is someone that I think would be really interested in learning more about voting. And then there's also people that are like, my parents aren't very political. My parents don't vote. Like, I don't really think that I would be this interested in it. But I think that having those conversations, especially because Kayla, who's the person that I interviewed in my episode, was pretty young. She talked in a way that, you know, was engaging and was very dynamic and understandable to people my age. I think all of them, at least from what they told me, connected to it on some level because it really feels like a very raw and honest conversation between just like two young people who just want to be more involved in like the policies and the things that really affect our lives. So I think that was very intriguing to a lot of people.
Are we allowed to, can we have this shared with us at some point?
Yes, so all the episodes will be posted to our network-wide feed. They'll be published at the beginning of January, as well as the fellows may be publishing it on their own feeds. so we can share all of that
Oh,
with
that's
everyone.
great. That'd be great because I'd love to. I'll send you my 2 cents after I listen. It sounds really intriguing. I was I was going to say, um, there is connecting the dots between, what civics, how things get done in a government. And I was working on a project with the Norman Lear Center, which is a democracy group. And they are constantly trying to figure out how do we connect the dots between, like, if I want, what is civics, right? And how, if this abstract concept. And so, it's little things like, uh, how many car accidents do we have to have at this intersection before somebody gets their act together and puts a traffic light up, right? Like, it can be mundane stuff like that. And and so from a high school point of view, or from a, young people point of view, there's all sorts of democracy um, tenets that can be expressed in that context, right? Like, when I was in high school, I ran for office, right? So, I had to go through all those steps, and so I'm wondering if that's a relatable way to, connect the younger audience to, the broader issues of democracy, as opposed to, and I'm not suggesting that you're doing this, but as opposed to a federal issue that, seems impossibly big for, a single person to contemplate.
Yeah, for sure. I think like something that I talked about with Kayla during the episode was how there's a lot of youth councils that are created for organizations that are like on paper kind of giving these young people a voice, but they don't actually end up having any role, or like they don't doesn't really facilitate anything productive. And so that I think that's a really big issue because we have to get people involved in local spaces and like smaller scale things where young people can start to get their foot in the door. But we also have to make sure that those opportunities are actually impactful and aren't just something that an organization can write off as having youth engagement. Like it really needs to be something where young people can be taking actionable steps and like getting a real taste for what it's like to make an impact in
Mm,
whatever sort of civic landscape they're in.
yeah, that's cool.
I think that's a really good insight because nobody gives power away lightly or easily. And that goes for young people. If we can just kind of like check that box off, that happens all the time. And it's not specific to young people, it's to anybody. You know, um, Anyway, so that's a big problem. But I'm wondering, can you say something about what you took away from what's a civic success? I mean, what is it that she or you think they are proposing or trying that you think is interesting or worth replicating?
Yeah, so something really interesting when I asked Kayla about this is she held sort of like a focus group, I guess is what you would call it. She's based in Chicago. And so they recruited people by literally just putting up flyers and stuff around like town, around places where, young people, young adults would be. And they had these people come in and just really talk about what they felt were the problems with like democracy and with how young people function in that. And so the Civic Success Project is relatively new. It started just this past summer. So they're at a stage where they're just trying to get a good handle on like what is the problem. But now when I talk to Kayla about like some of the really big issues that she's starting to encounter, she has also kind of brought up the barrier of, okay, now we know these issues, but how do we actually go about solving this beyond just saying that, we're going to get young people involved, we're going to do this and that. Like, how does that actually become like an actionable thing? And I've been using that word a lot, but I think it really is so important when we talk about this because it's so much easier to say these things than it is to actually put them into action. So I like the general idea of bringing in these everyday people just from flyers around a city and having them sit down and share their ideas. I think that's something that we could really take away and translate into other projects. I know she was also talking about expanding. So her board is all people under the age of 30, and she has people like all the way on the East Coast. She has basically everywhere. They're expanding right now, I believe, to my coast, so California, on the West Coast. But I like how she is really incorporating geographically a big range of people, but also demographically from like the range of people's experiences. Like just putting up a flyer and asking people to come, you're going to get a lot of different people who have come from a lot of different places and, have
Mhm.
different experiences in democracy. And so I really like how she was able to diversify those voices.
We're going to go ahead and shift to Joseph and Shae, but Annalise, thank you so much for sharing
Mhm.
that and
Thank
for the
you.
great questions from everyone
Yeah.
else. Shae and Joseph, same thing. We will have you present your podcast, your idea, the audience that you're speaking to, a little bit about what your interview was about and kind of the focus for the podcast into the future. So take it away, Shae and Joseph.
Sure. I'll start the conversation. I mean, Shae and I both went to the same master's program at the University of Chicago, focused on social sciences. Shae focused on political theory and historical sociology, while I was focusing on intellectual history as related to political theory or democratic theory and connection to scientific and religious structures. So he and I had been talking about trying to run a podcast for well, it's been years now. So we just finally decided to put it together after we both ended up moving to Los Angeles for different reasons, and then we found the fellowship and decided to apply and get to work on it. So our podcast, which we've called Techgnostics, focuses on trying to bring more of a philosophical lens to tech discussion and tech issues. Broadly, tech issues tend to lack this sociological, historical, and philosophical lens. And I think, at least between Shae and I, we've noticed thus far a heavy emphasis on more of a scientist or a scientistic kind of a structure, that being referring to scientism as an intellectual paradigm. So um, there's the focus of bringing more of a philosophical view to tech issues into the tech universe. There's also bring trying to bring more of a political and theological dimension to this discussion, and trying to also bring some of the actual theory and the hard knowledge behind these dynamics in more of a historical sense. So, we're one of our big episode ideas that we've been working with is trying to do a series of sort of intellectual dossiers on some of the big tech giants, whether that be Thiel or Musk or Zuckerberg. Although Thiel was really the main draw because he's seems to be the one with the most um, in, intellectual historical background. So this should hopefully give kind of a snapshot. But Shae, do you want to pick up the rest of it, or the other sections we talked about?
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. Thank you.
For sure.
Would you mind muting yourself, and I could hear myself
Of
a little
course,
bit?
of course.
Thank you. Yeah. So in general, Joe, I think, has spoken to I think a more panoramic view of what we're trying to do. I want to speak a bit more particularly to the shape of the discussions that we want to have on the podcast. I think incidentally, Joe currently works in tech consulting. So one of the things that we're both trying to speak to relative to Joe's position and then relative to my position in academia is people in the tech sector themselves, people who are older Gen Z, people our age, who are in the midst of, I think, the major upheavals that are taking place right now, and who may feel a sense of anime, who may feel a sense of atomization, who may not know the real degree to which major political actors, both in the tech sector and at the federal level in electoral politics, are working together to shape tech policy now with AI, especially, which has been quite fraught in the news over the past several months. And so part of what we want to speak to in our discussions is not only historicizing, but bringing these historical theories to bear on the actors that are in the news right now. And so, me being in academia, I have several contacts who are doing this work, one of whom Joe and I have been speaking with about interviewing on the podcast, who has done some work on China's social credit system or lack of system in that, according to her research, it's a bit more of a fragmented assemblage. So that's really, I think, what we're trying to do to speak to an audience that we feel is quite ignorant of a lot of the historical context behind the policies that are being shaped right now, and to not only, I think, draw them towards thinking about those policies, but draw them towards the history that's shaping the sort of work they're doing in the tech sector, whether it be consulting or Silicon Valley, et cetera. So I think that's the long and short of it. So far, we graciously were afforded an interview with Dr. Beam, who's on the call, who spoke to his work in, I believe, American political theology, evangelicalism, etc. So this spoke to a bit more of, I think, the agenda setting that's taking place with respect to tech policy right now at the level of Christian nationalism, at the level of the integration of this technology into a Christian nationalist project. So that was fantastic. Though I will say in that discussion, I don't think we spoke to technology quite as much. But as Joe said, yes, we are attempting to integrate the theological aspect of this as well. So far as there are like large scale normative claims, large claims about what we want the American state to be, what we want American people to have, and at this moment in particular, theology is still playing a large role in how those claims are being made rhetorically, at
Shae,
least on the right.
who is
Yes.
who is that when you're saying they want us to, who are you referring to?
Sorry, I may have misspoke.
Well, when you were saying, you have this religious component or theological component, right?
Yes.
And then you had mentioned, and maybe I missed it, but you had mentioned, and they are, wanting this society to be this way.
Oh, I don't believe I used the word they. I may have stumbled
What?
over my words. But what I meant there was, especially on the right and in the Republican Party, there's a major contingent of actors that have a theologically motivated vision for the American people, the American state. And these actors are using technology and technological policy to further that religious agenda.
Got it. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Thank
So
you.
in the case, yeah, of course. So in the case of somebody like Peter Thiel, the white national Christian nationalism is a bit in the background, but it is still like very obviously there so far as somebody like Thiel has engaged with Leo Strauss and is familiar with his political project, which is distinctly theological. So we really want to draw attention to the major intellectual, especially conservative intellectual work that's going on behind the scenes, and really to begin to tell and hope to tell through academics, speaking with academics who are studying these actors and these theories, to begin to tell a public-facing counter story that is able to speak to and account for, I think, the sort of monster that's developing behind the scenes right now.
So I
And
just
is
have to,
your,
oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry. I just have to say first, I love just the fact that contrasting these two shows, I think really shows the breadth of experience we had. I know that the two others that we don't have today are also very different from these two that we've heard from. So I'm excited for everyone to hear these episodes. But Shae and Joe, I just said this is maybe as much of a comment as a question, but these thinking about these big tech companies and the people and the actors behind them, as you've been speaking about, it can often feel like there's a lack of agency that we all have as people who we're just like cogs in a machine or people who use these products or we don't have any agency here to do anything about these policies that we might find to be disturbing or alarming or some combination thereof. And so I guess I wonder if you have thought about addressing that in some way in your show, and if not, perhaps I would encourage you to maybe consider that in the future so you have both the theoretical and the practical.
Yes, absolutely. I can hand it off to Joe in a moment, but at least for me, my research itself concerns how we can reclaim generative algorithms, whether that be through content distribution or now generative AI to produce content that can be politically salient and politically mobilizing. So that in the background has already informed some of the podcast episodes we've recorded between each other. We recorded one on Gilles Deleuze, who's a French philosopher who is concerned with human autonomy and technology, of course, as well. But so that's to say, we've already, in that episode recording, attempted to bring some of his work to bear on how we could use the tools that are in our midst to do something that may run against the grain of the policy actors. So at a larger level, though, I do think we also want to speak with academics who are, so to say, activist academics that are attempting to do their own public facing work that's drawing attention to similar things for these reasons. So absolutely. Joe, I'm not sure if there's anything else you were thinking in that respect.
Um, no, I mean, you really covered it. I would say that really just what could be said further would just be that the podcast, in answering the question about autonomy in relation to technological forces, I mean, I think one of the main things that technological forces benefit from is a sense of being taken for granted or being de-intellectualized in a certain way. And if anything, the podcast exists to sufficiently and properly situate technological efforts within and inside of intellectual inquiry of all these different species, whether that be theological, political, sociological, historical. So we're trying to situate and put all of these subjects underneath the microscope that they need to be put under, because a lot of times that lack of autonomy, I think, can come from taking scientific developments for granted and in a vacuum. So. But Shae is really Shae in his academic work is tackling this most specifically with algorithms, in the way that uh, algorithms are taken for granted as just the sociological weather, like how we consume data. And the same thing goes for, say, how we understand data rights and the ways that we um, say have freely given away, voluntarily given away all of our rights to data, to the data that we give to companies, which is literally worth is worth capital, is worth money, which, of course, we quote unquote voluntarily give away by agreeing to use services that we have to use in order to function in society. So there's a lot going on here, and obviously that's obvious, but if there's anything that could be stressed, it's that the podcasts to try and situate all of these dynamics under as many non-strictly scientific paradigms as possible, because that's really the weak point currently, at least in my opinion. So that's what I would offer on it.
Mm.
I'll recapitulate very briefly. I think the hope is that by performing that contextualization, that feeling of anomie, of hopelessness, of like learned helplessness in a way, can be combated, such that we don't feel like cogs in the system, that as we listen to these details, we come to a realization that what we are living through is still in process, and that we, the average person, the average listener, can be a part of that process. And we already are by becoming aware that it is a process. That's the hope, I think.
By the way, back to Jenna's point, it seems like you guys are doing the exact same podcast in that regard, right? Like she's looking for actionable steps and how to engage people. Well, like I think that, you know, digging in on these issues, we have a tendency to look at tech as, tech innovations or policy as relatively benign, like this is really complicated. Somebody else will do the heavy thinking for me and I'll have some moderate trust in those decisions, right? And so we just kind of kick it down the road a little bit. But the work that you're doing, it does seem like, wow, this is empowering for the punters out there, which I am one, right?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think
I'd
that's
love to hear
really,
I'd love
yeah.
to hear this one too, by the way.
It, the one thing that I think is common between these two is at least an opportunity that I associate with, basic fundamental politics. People are motivated and have forever been motivated primarily by two things, fear and anger. And insofar as you're making the kind of pitches that I want to make, right? Which is like civic duty and the discipline associated with being a good Democrat, that goes nowhere, right? But if you are able to frame an argument that um, your our generation is particularly um, bearing the brunt of these whatever social movements, policy decisions, cultural trends, whatever you want to talk about, um, that your group, your age didn't have anything to do with creating, but you're the ones that are getting screwed by it. I think that is there's, thousands of years of evidence to show that that works. And that it might be really, in the end of the day, the only thing that works. And especially when you're talking about a group that is, for a lot of good reasons and a lot of bad reasons, apathetic towards civic realities, towards civic obligations. So, that's the one thing I would encourage you both to think about is, years and decades ago, I tried to push young people to organize around climate change, saying basically that you didn't create this problem, but you're the ones who are going to have to deal with the repercussions of it. And if that doesn't get you angry, I don't know, I don't know why not. And I don't know what you do about that. I don't know, except to just, just be a contented frog in the pot of water that's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. I don't know what else you can do except get angry and get politicized. So that didn't work, and I don't know that any other option is really going to work. But I would say that that way of framing your question, not just how do we get young people activated, but what is it that really is making them angry about the way the world is, and what can they do about it is a more fruitful tack.
Mm, mm.
Excellent. Any further questions before we wrap up?
No, I congratulate both of you on these podcasts. I will say I am legitimately eager to listen to both of them. Um, I uh, I am not a scientist, and so just hearing you two talk about your stuff is, challenging for me, right? Like I'm thinking, okay, I need to put my thinking cap on when I'm going to listen to this, right? Whereas I've spent my career as a children's television producer and a game maker, and so I understand, the triggers for the younger audience, and I understand the challenges that Annalise is trying to conquer here, right? And so I found that more relatable and more impossible all at once, right? Whereas your podcast, I think, is just sheer kind of interest for me. I'm really interested to see how this comes out. I'm interested to help Annalise because I'm telling you, if we can conquer that one, uh, we can start to move society a little bit.
Yeah, that's wonderful, David. Thank you. We also will have 10 zines and Alina's podcast that'll be published alongside Shae, Joseph's, and Annalise when those come out in January. So I will send links out to everyone in the network, as well as anybody that's watching this recording. That will be in the description down below, so that you can immediately listen to those. But thank you to the fellows so much for your hard work during the fellowship. I'm excited to get these episodes out to everyone, and to our guests that came to the commencement and asked questions. Very much appreciate you coming today. So with
Is
that, I'll
there,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, is there
Go ahead.
an ability for us to have a feedback loop? Like after we watch, do we send comments to you, Jenna, or like tell me how that would work?
I can get your emails to them
Okay,
and their emails to you, and you can send those comments along.
fabulous.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming today. We'll go ahead and wrap up, but I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and your episodes will be out in January. So we'll be excited to share those with everyone.
Yeah, thanks again. Great work, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Yes, thank you
you.
all.
Bye.